Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
All right, let's introduce our speaker for today, Charles Garfield. Charles Garfield is a psychologist, professor, and lecturer, and the author of 12 books, including Life's Last Gift. He's been recognized internationally as the founder of Shanti Project, a widely acclaimed AIDS and cancer service organization. For more than 40 years, he has pioneered the development of healthcare and social service-oriented volunteer organizations in a wide variety of settings. Of these efforts, Garfield says, Shanti's work demonstrates that health professionals and volunteers, America's largely unrecognized workforce, can learn to be tender with people and tough on problems as they serve those who need them most. Welcome, Charles. As I said, you won't see him, but you will hear him, hopefully.
I hope you hear me. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we hear you.
Wonderful. I guess being a disembodied voice has some advantages. We're at a time now where much is going on in the country, and before I start and getting into all sorts of things having to do with our wisdom years, I'd like to let you know that one of your old friends is with us today. Cindy Spring is here, who was a leader of your retreat, a GBF retreat recently, and she'd like to say hello to the group.
Hello, everyone. I am married to this wonderful man, and you're going to get an incredible talk. I've been having the privilege of listening to his wisdom and compassion for almost 40 years now. And thank you again. I'm deeply grateful for being able to spend a day with you last September. It still stays in my heart, and it was really a special occasion. Thank you.
Okay, let's begin. As everybody knows, we're at a time now in our country with the backdrop of a pandemic, and the cities of this country and overseas being ablaze with protests over an unimaginably horrible murder. And if there was ever a time for wisdom, this is it. If there was ever a time that our nation and the nations of the world need wisdom, this is the time. What I'd like to talk about today is precisely that, the notion of wisdom, but I'd like to talk about it in the context of our wisdom years. Our wisdom years is the title of a book that I just wrote that's coming out shortly. It's available now, and it taught me a lot about later life and what people starting in their 50s perhaps, maybe even earlier, but certainly by the time people reach 60, the kind of awarenesses that come with aging. Now, I call the book Our Wisdom Years because it refers to a new stage of development. It's important to get this, the new stage of development beyond adulthood. Just like adulthood follows adolescence, and we'd all agree with that, I'm sure. Well, there's a new stage following adulthood that we don't talk about, we're not aware of. And I call it our wisdom years. It starts for most of us around the age of 60, sometimes in our mid-50s. We get glimmerings of it even earlier than that. And it has a different set of possibilities and priorities than adulthood does. If you try to continue with the priorities of adulthood into later life, you're asking for sorrow. Now, there are very few user-friendly books on the challenges of later life. There's so many books on child development and adolescence and adult development, but very few user-friendly books about later life. So that's why I wrote Our Wisdom Years. Happily enough, and I'll say this with great humility, I hope you appreciate the way I'm saying this. Amazon picked the book as its #1 new release in the aging category. I'm extremely grateful that people are responding. They're getting the intention of the book. Okay, let me dive into some of the questions that we address in the book and in our research on our wisdom years. First, why does some of the most profound growth of our life happen after the age of 60? Well, after 60, that begins, as I said, a new stage of, after adulthood, a new stage of life. And it's as important and substantial as the transition from adolescence to adulthood. Fulfillment matters now more than success. Fulfillment more than success. And although there's an increasing awareness of a limited lifespan, we're more and more aware of our mortality after age 60. There's also the reality that the fastest growing segment of the population, the fastest growing segment, are people over 100. So if you're 60 years old, you may have 20 or 30 or maybe even 40 more years of life. So the demographics say. Two of the most vital lessons as we review our lives during our wisdom years are: who do we truly love and who truly loves us? The question of love. And what work have we done that's made a positive difference in the lives of others? Love and work. We're more conscious of, as I say, of our mortality, but we're also more conscious of this centrality, the importance of love relationships, not only now, but throughout the long arc of our life. And work we're proud of, work that made a difference to an individual, to a person, to a group, to a larger context. Now, another question that begs to be asked is, how do we find our most meaningful sense of direction in our wisdom years? What I suggest is first visualize a time in your past when you did work that was most fulfilling and meaningful, but perhaps incomplete. I'll give you an example. My parents met in an acting class after high school. My father wanted to be an actor more than anything else in the world, but it was during the Depression, and acting was not a good choice if you wanted to make a living and support a family. So he went into sales. He was a salesman for over 40 years. And I asked him about the choice of salesman, and he said it was as close to acting as I could possibly get. Well, when he retired, within weeks of his retirement, he joined an acting troupe, became the leading man in a series of plays, fulfilled his life's dream, and talked about acting to me constantly until the day he died. What's so compelling to me is that he picked it up after 40 years. Something lay dormant for 40 years. Now, the same holds true for other members of my family. My mother always wanted to get her doctorate. She said, my firstborn son has a doctorate and I want to get a doctorate. But when she retired, my parents moved from New York to California. Within weeks of getting here and settling in, she got a catalog from UC Berkeley, and she wandered around the campus taking courses that she wanted to take. She prepared her own curriculum, nothing formal. She didn't have to take exams. She didn't have to do papers. She did the courses, sat in on the courses, and when I said nobody minds that you sit in, she said nobody's going to kick out a little old lady. And she fulfilled her desire to get that doctorate. It wasn't a formal one. It wasn't a real one with a diploma, although I got her a diploma when she finished. But it was an idea that she had had for decades. Visualize a time in your past where you did something fulfilling and meaningful, but perhaps incomplete. And second, visualize your life 5 years from now and ask yourself, how do I most want to spend those 5 years? As I look back on it, project 5 years into the future and ask, how would I most like to spend those 5 years? How would they be most fulfilling to me? Now, another question. Why is our model of what it means to grow older incomplete? Well, there are two models of aging. See if either of these are models that you found traps. One is what I call the decline and debilitation model. Namely, nothing works. I'm wearing out. I'm like a worn out machine. I feel awful all of the time, physically and emotionally. It's just all about aging is just all about decline and debilitation. It's predominantly a negative view, and I found terribly incomplete. I have friends in their 90s, people I know well, to a person, that they're not as
Charlie, we're losing your audio. Can you hear me?
well. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you, yes.
I turned it up. Maybe that's better.
Okay.
The decline and debilitation model, the wearing out model, isn't what summarizes the later life period as well. Now, another model that's really a trap is I'm good as I was. I'm the same. Nothing's different. You see people trying to look the same and look beautiful and feel beautiful and exercise the same way as they did when they were in their 20s. That's simply not feasible. What's happening now is another model. It's not just decline and debilitation. It's not just I'm the same as I ever was. It's about fulfillment. It's about a new stage, as they say, a new stage of life. When I was in my 60s, I'll give you an example. I had a hip replacement, which is a pretty substantial surgery, although it turns out well, and in my case turned out well. But for years, because I was afraid of the surgery, I walked around hobbling and I couldn't move very well. Was there anything good about that? Well, it slowed me down. I paid attention more. I was in the moment more. Presence mattered more. I could see things that I never saw because I took the time to look at them because I had to sit still so much. I remember connecting with other people in more loving fashion and more compassionate fashion. Once I was crossing the street, another man came across in the opposite direction. He saw me limping, and he looked at me and he said, "Is it a knee?" And I said, "No, it's a hip." He said, "Mine is a knee." And we ended up commiserating on a park bench for half an hour about where we were going to get it replaced and how it felt and whether there were any advantages. Another very interesting question is, why is the notion of successful or active aging problematic? Successful or active aging is a problem in our wisdom is because it says that achievement and success are the bottom line. Achievement and success are the bottom line earlier, but something else is happening. It's based on the assumption that later life is merely an extension of adulthood, which it's not, and it ignores the priorities of this new stage. Bottom line, we're no longer climbing a ladder. In fact, there's no more ladder to climb. We're talking more about love and work. We're talking about our higher values. The successful aging paradigm is based on doing doing stuff, getting things done, to-do lists, calendars, while our wisdom years are based on answering the question, who is my soul calling me to be? Who is my soul calling me to be? Now, during this time of pandemic, during this time of our cities burning because of racial tension, wounds that have been festering for decades, longer than that, hundreds of years in the case of racial disharmony, who is my soul calling me to be? Ask yourself that question. As I live my later years, who is my soul calling me to be? Now, another question I'd like to bring up is the question of how can we retrieve forgotten or neglected parts of ourselves? Retrieve forgotten or neglected parts. First, ask yourself the question, what neglected parts of myself would I leave that would leave me most content if I were able to actualize them? What have I always wanted to do that I can still do, at least in some form? Like with the story of my father and his acting, or my mother and her doctoral degree. Second, describe your life were you to actualize these neglected parts of yourself. How would it work? How would your life be if you actually did the kinds of things you most want to do? Okay. How can we be grateful? The two keys to alleviating regret and being grateful are self-compassion and self-forgiveness. Write yourself a forgiveness letter. A letter to yourself that includes the observation that you did the best you could, given who you were at the time and what you knew at the time. You did the best you could. And also write in the letter what you've learned from what you regret that you'll never do again. You don't have to do anything else except write it. It's amazing how powerful externalizing that regret can be. What I mean by externalizing is write it out. Write out a letter to yourself. Allow yourself to feel the gratitude that comes from letting go of self-recrimination and from learning to be a better person as you learn the lessons that come from regret. Okay, how can we leave a legacy that we're proud of? Now, this notion of legacy may seem like a whole big deal, and what I mean by legacy is not something huge. It doesn't have to be something huge. It can be, what do you want to leave behind to your friends, to those who come after? There may be children and grandchildren involved. There may be other people involved. There may be partners and lovers involved. What do you want to leave behind about that you're most proud of and that seems most important to you? What legacy project might you develop in your wisdom years that'll serve as an expression of your higher values? Something about beauty or compassion or justice or service. Okay, this legacy project can be simple. As I say, simple like writing a letter to your grandchildren, writing a letter to a friend, to a lover. As I said, it's important that it doesn't have to be something huge. When I think of my legacy project, one of the things that's kind of obvious is Shanti Project. I started Shanti Project almost 46 years ago. Began in 1974 as a volunteer support program, a peer support program for people with cancer. And then in 1981, as many of us know who have lived to a certain age, a new illness started that was called initially gay cancer and then GRID and then, of course, AIDS. One of the things I'm most proud of is Shanti turned its attention from cancer to AIDS and committed ourselves, even at a time when we didn't know what the mode of transmission was. It didn't even know how you catch the thing. People still stayed in there, stayed with their clients, provided the kind of emotional and practical support that can be invaluable when people are really up against it. And now it's all these years later. And you might guess what I'm going to say next, but with COVID-19 raging in the world, yes, Shanti has added a new program. We're not forgetting our clients with cancer. We're not forgetting our clients with AIDS, but now we have clients with COVID-19. We have a new program that's caring for those people who are struggling with this awful virus. That's my legacy. When I'm up in the middle of the night wondering about the meaning of my life, the word Shanti comes to mind. For you, it might be something different. It will be something different. It might be some message you want to connote, or you want to give, that connotes higher values, beauty or justice, love, compassion. It can be a small act of kindness. Your legacy can be, in Cindy's case, one of the things I learned from her and we've learned from each other is when somebody is asking for support on the street, give it to them, whatever you can. When I see somebody who's asking for $1 or $2 or whatever I can afford, I give it to them. I don't ask questions about their intentions. That makes no difference to me. If somebody needs something and they're asking for it, I give it to them. That's part of the legacy I want to leave. Small acts of kindness, small acts of compassion. Okay. Much to say. As I began with, the world is in difficult straits right now. As you know, over 100,000 people have died. The numbers are probably much higher than this, just in the U.S. alone, from COVID-19. And an awful act of murder has resulted in the protests throughout the nation. This is a time for wisdom. This is a time when understanding that in later life, wisdom is most available to us. In fact, there are entire cultures, as you know, or Asian cultures, indigenous peoples, who value the wisdom of their elders as a most valuable contribution to the group. What if we could revive that? What if those of us of a certain age are also held as valuable contributors because we've lived long enough in the long arc of our life to offer things of value to the collective, to the culture, to the society? Okay, you know what I'd like to do now, just to make sure everybody's on the same page? I'd like to ask if there are any questions, and to spend a fair amount of time just going over this and asking questions that hopefully I can offer a reasonable response to. Let's take this as a chance to form a wisdom circle of elders and ask those questions that are most important to us. So I'll stop now just for a few minutes and see where we are and see what questions are percolating. And if you could identify yourself, because I can't see you, if you just give your name and then ask the question.
Okay, if I may, I have a question. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but say your name for Charles.
I'm Clint. It's been my own personal experience, Charles. I'm 70 years old, so I'm definitely a senior. There's two parallel images, maybe even stereotypes of an elder. Well, it's not stereotypes. I mean, the one that you described, where you logged all these years, you picked up some wisdom, you have a much broader perceptive view of how human beings work, and you're retired, so you have time to do things you couldn't do before. That's one image. And the other image is when you look at the Republican senators, where you get hidebound and just caught up in your own idiosyncrasies and obsessions, and it's just a very limited vision of what being a human being is. And there's a stereotype that the cranky old man who yells at the kids to get off his lawn, or these corrupt Republican senators that are like about 80 years old that still, I won't go on there. But anyway, I wonder if you could talk about those two parallel paths that are open to people who are aging, where one seems to be one of growth and enrichment, and one seems to be one of being hidebound and even more bigoted than ever.
Well, I think that what you're really saying there, and it's an important question, is what happens to people when they refuse to grow, when development is stunted and arrested, when people stick with what they've always done and refuse to grow. It's like an adolescent who refuses to go into adulthood. You're asking for problems. You're asking for difficulties. Our wisdom years really have a whole different set of priorities and possibilities than adulthood. People who understand that, and it's the reason I wrote the book. I wanted people to understand that there was a whole new stage available to us because we're living longer. My counsel to anybody who's stuck in what they've always done is recognize that they probably have entered a new stage that they've not acknowledged that has to do with wisdom, and really understand what wisdom means, that it's based on our highest values, not just on success and performance and achievement, but rather on justice and service and love and compassion. It's a choice. It's a choice we can make. Any other questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me, Charles?
Cass, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I'm in another group where somebody has asked me to reflect on the lessons learned, perhaps, or the experience of going through the AIDS crisis, and how what that has to tell people today about what they're going through. And I guess the question becomes one of like how it changed us, changed me, changed us, coming out of the AIDS epidemic and into a different world for us. And if there are kind of parallels as we struggle now to come out of the pandemic into some sense of normalcy. For me, it felt like a little bit like just reliving, like going back into sort of a nightmare in which basically it felt like what I was doing was just coping with the practical needs of people that I knew and people I loved. And I'm not sure that I have the wisdom or reflected enough on what changed in me, but I know that I was a different person at the end of that period than going into it, with some different values. So the question is how to apply that to what is coming for people coming out of this and getting social again. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts in that regard.
Yeah, I do. I think many of us who went through the very beginning when things were unspeakably awful learned some things, and it accelerated our development, whether we were aware of it or not. We were in the middle of a crisis, so it's hard to reflect when you're in the middle of a crisis. But there are some things that I know that I learned about the purpose and meaning of my life that came directly from the epidemic. One of the things was the importance and centrality of relationship. So many people were lost. There was, each grave opened up all the old graves again. So many people were lost that the value of relationship became paramount. Those people who were still here became so important to me. And the second thing is, and it may be because of Shanti, but I think it was for anybody who took care of anyone. If you took care of one friend during that period, you learned how important contribution was, how important service was. What I learned most importantly, and what the rest of my life has been based on, are those two things, love and work. Now we're in the middle of another crisis. And I would suggest to you that you, Cass, and myself and anybody else who went through that period are the new elders for COVID-19. We're the new wisdom circle for COVID-19. We have much to offer because of the earlier AIDS experience. And somebody might ask, well, what did you learn about relationships besides the fact that your close people are unspeakably valuable to you? I learned three things about relationship during the AIDS period that are now directly applicable. One is the importance of listening from the heart to people who are up against it. Listening from the heart, really listening to people, really getting what they're saying. Second is speaking from the heart. Saying what you know to be true from your own experience, not some book learning, or not that the books are not valuable, but your own experience is the most valuable teacher. And then, of course, acting from the heart. What most compassionate thing can you do right now for this individual? And it may be just listening, but it may be something else. And those two things are directly gifts from the AIDS experience that are now directly applicable to the COVID experience. That was a very important one. Remember that those of us who went through the AIDS experience are now the new elders in the COVID experience. Anything else? We got some time.
There's a question in the chat from David. If you can see the chat, he typed a question.
Can you see the chat, Charles?
No.
Okay, I'll read the question from Tom Bruein. How would the approach change for those who find themselves needing to still be in their, quote, success and earning phase, with financial retirement not secure and the component of leisure missing? How are the wisdom years perhaps constrained?
They may be constrained if you take the success paradigm as paramount. I surely understand the need for making a living, and that extends into 60s and 70s and God knows how long. That's important. I'm not saying disregard it. I'm not saying disregard achieving things. What I am saying is that something new is pressing to be born. Pay attention to it. Begin it as a hobby. Begin it as something that you can do in addition to the work that you do. Something that absolutely thrills you, that's new. It's like a birth process. So I'm not saying that earning a living and trying to make ends meet is irrelevant. It's not. Of course it's not. What I am saying is what else is pressing to be born during this time? Sit still. See what comes up in your meditations. See what imagery comes up. Pay attention to your dreams. Sit still. One of the marvelous things, it sounds peculiar, but one of the marvelous things about sheltering in place is that many of us are staying home and sitting still. Instead of viewing it as loneliness, view it as a spiritual retreat. I spend an awful lot of time now alone because I don't go out much. This is a time to pay attention to what's emerging during this period. Now, it doesn't change the fact that earning a living is still important. It's in addition to that. It's a gift. It's a gift if you can accept it as such. What else do we have?
I just posted a question on chat.
Yeah, I'll read the question from Clint. When researching for your book, did you compare cultures that honor elders, like in Asia, versus those cultures like ours that usually regard elders dismissively? How do these differences affect how the elder people are nurtured to grow?
Well, interestingly enough, as you might suspect, when we take a look at Asian cultures or indigenous cultures, there is the assumption, and it's an assumption on the part of the collective, on the entire society, that the elders contain the wisdom. Nobody doubts that. So when I took that as an inspiration. What if our culture began to see our elders in the same way, began to see our wisdom years, and it's why I call the book Our Wisdom Years, as a time for embodying the highest values in our culture? Are you willing to do it is my question. Are we willing to embrace our own identities, our own shifting identities, and move more toward being the elders of the collective? Can you feel it? It's a set of feelings in addition to a set of thoughts. Can you feel yourself growing into that new stage the way an adolescent feels himself or herself growing into adulthood? I was inspired tremendously by Asian cultures and indigenous cultures while researching the book. And you see it in cultures like Indian cultures, East Indian cultures as well, a reverence, at least in traditional cultures, a reverence for the elderly.
There's one more question from Mike Gorman. One of the most frustrating and counterintuitive challenges of COVID-19 is that it seems to frustrate or even sever relationships, the very fabric of the community, the very antithesis of what we did in the time of AIDS. How can we reinvent a sense of connection and community? Of course, we can go in part through such media as Zoom.
It's a wonderful question. We're now held apart rather than connected. And these sheltering in place is forcing us to be apart from each other. What I find myself doing each day in the morning, I write a list of a few people I want to connect with that day. And I'll connect with them online. I'll connect with them on the telephone. I'll write them a letter. The old-fashioned habit of letter writing has become an important part of my life. I send them an email, although handwritten notes are somehow a little more intimate. And I make sure that the other person understands that I'm trying to make this connection and it matters to me. That there's no doubt that being held apart, not being able to meet in person is a challenge, and it diminishes the kind of intimacy that we had during the AIDS period, but during the early parts of the AIDS period, but not that it's over now. But I make sure that, and try it as an exercise. Each morning, write out one or more people. I usually pick 3 or 4. And I make an effort to connect with those people each day. It might be brief, it might be something more extensive. And I express the fact that there's love, that I miss them, that I look forward to a time when things allow us to be together again. And don't take that as an inferior form of connection. It's the best we can do under the circumstances, but it's important that we do it.
Looks like we have another question. Or maybe it's a continuation of the previous question. Example, recently I learned of a suicide of a gay man in his late 50s in Palm Springs. Turns out he was so depressed by isolation he became despondent. This is the terrible downside of sheltering at home.
Yeah, it is. And ask yourself the question, what are the various reactions to sheltering at home? If there's an undiagnosed depression or even a diagnosed depression, if there's something really severe going on, this kind of isolation can be the thing that breaks the straw that breaks the camel's back. But I would venture to say that most of us are feeling some loneliness right now, which is why I offered the suggestion of maintaining contact as best you can, maintaining the intimacy as best you can. This is a tough period, and it's going to continue being a tough period. And when we come out the other side of it, it's not going to be going back to normal. There's not going to be the old normal. The ways of living that we had are going to be altered irrevocably in the future. And we're just now starting to see what the outlines of that future might be. It's hard to even identify them in this early stage, but it's going to be different. And what I'm arguing for is, can it be suffused with wisdom? Can we take our older folks as sources of wisdom in this new normal that will be emergent as we start getting through this crisis?
Charlie, we have one more question from John. Can you talk more about the task of life review?
Yes, absolutely. Two things I'd like to point out about life review. One is, and I said this before, it can reveal your legacy. Now, when I talk about life review, there's a whole chapter in the book, in our wisdom years, about life review. Go back to times in your past in which you had relationships that were most meaningful to you and what you learned from them. Go back to times in your past in which you did work that you're most proud of, or that was most enlivening to you, that you remember with greatest affection. And it may be a short period. It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. Love and work. Review your life, review the most significant aspects of your life, and ask yourself the question, what did I learn from those experiences of love and affection and intimacy? What did I learn from those experiences of work that I'm most proud of, that I can bring into the future, into my wisdom years? How can my wisdom years benefit from learning when I do that life review, from learning from love experiences and work experiences?
Thank you so much, Charlie. Even with all of our technical difficulties, I think it was a really rich and meaningful talk. I would like to ask now if there are any announcements from the group.
Yes, here.
Yes, Jack.
Hi. Last week I announced that newsletter, which we send out quarterly, wouldn't be coming out in its paper form because the logistics of processing 300 paper copies was a lot. But several guys in GBF stepped up and volunteered to do a lot more work than I thought was reasonable to ask people to do. And it's important that of those 300, about 50 or so go to regular people and all the rest go to incarcerated guys who are probably very receptive or in need of and would appreciate the newsletter. So this week, these guys, I separated all the packages, 5 different packages, and did a bunch myself, and I hope they've gone out by now, but they should. And it should be online on the GBF website soon. It wasn't yesterday, I think, but it should be. So that's an achievement, and I congratulate all those guys who volunteered to do that. So look for it on your website. Thanks.
Any other announcements?
Now would be a good time to make a donation to the order. You can go to the website, and there's a link to that facilitates making a contribution, because the order still has expenses that need to be met, and your generosity is greatly appreciated.
And also, you'll notice in the chat that there's a link to Charlie's book, Wisdom Years, if you want to get a copy of that. All right.
I have one announcement.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
On Wednesday nights, we have a GBF Zoom meeting from 7:30 to 9 p.m. We meditate from 7:30 to 8 and have a discussion group from 8 to 9. You're welcome to attend one or both of those sections. We'd love to have you.
Did you say what day that was?
Wednesday evening, 7:30 to 9.
Okay. Let's close with a dedication of merit. And I like to say that we don't have the beauty of being in the circle and holding hands, but maybe we can hold an intention of being together, because we have been, and we are together. Cass, put your hands down. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness, which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank
you,
you,
Charles. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jack.
Joe, thank you, Jack. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. That was really great.
Bye.
Thank you, Charlie. We appreciate you.
Have a good week.
Bye. Thank you, Joe.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Deep bows. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.